Tonight we're gonna make Amazon bean soup, which will have pinto beans, garlic, butter. I'm gonna use some cabbage, onions, pepper, salt, red chili, tomatoes, squash, the rest of a rutabaga, about 6 cups of broth, carrots, and spinach. Melt butter over medium heat in a large Dutch oven. Now that the butter is melted, you're going to add garlic, carrots, and onions. Cook and stir for 5 minutes. Next, we're going to add chicken broth. I have my chicken broth measured out in my blender because I know that we're going to use the blender later on in this recipe. Now you're going to stir this for 5 minutes, making sure that you scrape up anything that's browned at the bottom of the pan. Now that this has been cooking for about 5 minutes, we're going to add in squash, and I'm also going to add in about 2 cups of rutabaga because I didn't have quite as much squash as I'd like. So add the tomato, about 1 plum tomato. Said if you don't have, just estimate about the size of the oval shaped tomato to add. We're also adding the red pepper, salt, and black pepper. We're going to bring this to a boil. Now that we have this at a boil, we're going to reduce the heat to a simmer and simmer this for about 20 minutes. Now that we've had that simmered for 20 minutes, I removed about 3 cups and put it in my blender. I am going to let that cool for a minute because we don't want it to be too hot when it's being blended. You could stick it in the fridge if you'd like for a couple minutes too, or if you had room in your freezer. Now this recipe calls for 5 ounces of spinach, but I'm sorry, 10 ounces of spinach, but today I only had 5. So I actually am going to add cabbage to kind of give that extra weight that we're looking for, and I'm going to let that cook while I'm waiting for the removed soup to cool a bit. Now my blender has a little spout for additions, so I'm actually going to let that pop open a bit so that it doesn't create a seal because the liquid is still a bit warm. Now we're going to add that pureed soup right back to the pot. Now we're going to add the beans. We're also going to add spinach. This is a spinach arugula mix, which will work just fine because, I don't know if you've heard of my previous recipe, but almost any kind of greens mix will work.